This video is going to serve as an introduction to cases within NVivo. If you've used an older version of NVivo, these were referred to as case nodes and were essentially a type of node with a classification. This is much more simplified in NVivo 11 and is a lot easier to use. Nevertheless, these do still look like a lot of work. However, I find most researchers who decide to put them off end up going back in and adding them later. They do enable you to use a lot of the more powerful features of NVivo, and some of the things that we look at in the later videos you simply can't do if you've not got cases. Cases are essentially your units of measurement, so this is quite often your people or the people that you're interacting with. So in the examples that I have on the screen here, we're going to be using them for interviews, but they also work very well with focus groups or any other similar kind of data. Essentially, a case node is like making each of your participants their own little theme and allocating everything that they have said to that particular theme. Let's go ahead and create one, and then we can explain how they work a little later in the video. So to start off with, I'm going to have to head into classifications and then my case classifications. It's really important whenever you're creating classifications that you do them in the right folder. If you put them in the wrong place, they won't work as you need them to. You'll have to delete and start again. So classifications, case classifications, and then in list view, right click and new classification. Just as with the source classifications, these are the overall categories. So this isn't an individual, this is the category that they fall into. So I'm going to go for person. This could be participant, this could be interviewee, it could be subject, depends what you want to call them, but I'm just going to go for person for this one. And then just as before, I have the option to right click on my classification and add attribute. So my people have names, my people have ages, so I'm going to add that in as well. And just as before, I can also use the drop down option if I have a limited number of choices. So I could, for example, have employment, and I could add the options that I've got. And click OK. So I now have my case classification of person with the attribute name, age and employment. Now the thing that confuses some people is that we now need to create those cases. So to do that, I go to my nodes and you'll see there's a cases folder here. So in this cases folder, this is where I would create cases for my people. Now I'm going to do that by right clicking and going to new case. And I'm going to create 3 cases, one for each of my interviewees. So I have Charles, right click, new case, Barbara, and then again I've got Harry. I can now highlight each of them, right click, classification and person. So the classification of person is now linked to each of those, and once again if I go to explore, you'll see I have my case classification sheets, and I can click on person and it will list all of the people here and give me the option to type in or add in the data. So I could, for example, fill in their employment status and start typing in the data. I'll leave that there because you get the impression of how that works. If I right click and go to case properties, you'll see attribute values is just another way of doing that on an individual basis for each of these cases. Now with our cases, it's important that we put the text related to the participants within them. So now that I've created my cases and I've classified them, I need to go to my sources, open up the corresponding interview, and then essentially everything that Barbara has said I need to highlight, right click, code, and code it at the case of the same name. So Barbara's text is coded at Barbara's case, and click OK. And I need to go through my whole document doing this. You'll notice whenever you code something, you can code in your recent, and it just makes it slightly quicker. But this is still a lengthy process. To make it even quicker, we can do this with dragging and dropping. So to do that, with my interview still open in detailed view, I can go back over to the navigation pane. I can go to my nodes, cases, and you'll see I get a list of all of the cases here. And with that done, I can actually just highlight the text, drag and drop into Barbara. Now it's really important that I only bring in the participants' text here. If I start bringing in the things the interviewer has said, then as far as NVivo's concerned, those words were said by Barbara as well. Cases enable us to separate the words of the interviewer away from those of the participant. So later when you're running queries, it can stop your questions skewing your data. A really good example of this is within the demo project that's been included within NVivo. If you query the data and look at the most common used word, it appears to be east, but this is only because the researchers constantly ask about down east, and so therefore skewing the results. So now that all of this is coded, I can close Barbara's interview, and in my nodes, my cases, and in Barbara, I can double click on a case and it will now just show me all of the text that Barbara has said. So if I'm searching my data, I would search this case instead of the interview transcript, because this is just the words of the participant. Because of the case classification that we've added, we can also later search by the data we put in there. So for example, I could have added the attribute gender and added Barbara as female, Charles as male, Harry as male, and later I'd be able to query, well, what did the male say, what did the female say? This would be really useful if I was in gender studies. However, this could be used in any form of research where there's some kind of differential or comparative nature to it. So it could be whether a school teacher worked at school A or B or C that's important, or whether somebody is a manager or an employee. This would be really useful if I'm looking at the strategy the managers are talking about and then separately searching to see if that appears in what the employees have said. So cases enable us to really drill down to our data, query it in a very, very precise way that isn't skewed by the questions, but also use the data we know about our participants to refine the searches and queries that we're using later. Right now this looks like a lot of work, but when we look at queries in later videos, you'll see why this is actually something that's really useful for your NVivo project and something that can help you really harness the power of this program. The important thing to remember with a case is that it's a three-step process. The very first step is to create your classification here. This is your overarching category. Your second step is in your nodes and your cases to create a case for each individual participant or other unit of measurement that you're using, and to add the data to that. And then the third and final step is to go to the source or sources that that person appears in, and then to code the text at that case. As a reminder, we can do that by highlighting and dragging and dropping into the node, or by right-clicking and coding at the node in the list.